I farm because it's like a responsibility. It's like I want to do more with our conservation. I want to be a agent of change, and I feel like if I want sustainability on the planet, this is a way that I can physically manifest that and show that to others and help others learn and maybe model some new ways. Like, we don't have it figured out. The land that we're farming way north on the border, we're on the very far western edge of prairie pothole migratory bird habitat. And I'm so excited about some of this transition ground that we just took in, because now we're going to have some more contiguous management of organic. And I'm really excited to find other partners in conservation to say, what does that look like? How do we do agriculture integrated with nature? It's not like we're just setting it aside and we're going to do agriculture over here and nature over here. Like, she's part of it.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on pasture. You just heard from Anna Crabtree of Vilicus Farm, a dryland grain farm in northern Montana. They focus on biodiversity in the fields and an overall diversity in their income streams. I interviewed Anna and her husband Doug last summer and was really struck by their thoughts on how both farm subsidies and crop insurance affect their operation in a negative way. I'm so thrilled today to be speaking with Anna Jones-Crabtree of Vilicus Farms in north central Montana. Hi, Anna.
Hi, Lindley. How are you?
Good. I was checking out where your farm is, and you're all the way up next to the Canadian border. How did you end up there, and what is it like farming so far north?
Well, it's kind of funny. You think you're north, and then you realize there's an entire nation north. And we do actually farm land right on the border. So it's not a big wall. It's a barbed wire fence. And we landed here after a long search for farmland. Doug grew up in Ohio and was on an operation that didn't survive the crisis of the 80s. And so when I met him at Purdue, then we started looking for land and tried several land link opportunities in the Midwest that just totally did not work out for us. I already had a job and a career, and long story short, we fast forwarded to be 40 with no debt other than our house, and went on a search for land in Montana and decided to stay in Montana because Doug had been serving as the organic certification program manager for the state of Montana. So our network was here, and thought, why not? Land is available. And that's how we ended up here. We started with 1,280 acres in 2009 that we bought off the open market. And this season we are managing 12,600 acres. We had no idea land availability was going to be so great for us. And partly why we've scaled up is we've been taking on more acres to transition. So this year there was about 3,000 acres that we've started the transition into organic production. We have a 7-year crop rotation across most of the farm. There's a component of small grains, there's a component of legumes, which tend to be lentils or peas, and then a component of broadleaves and oil seeds, which are like flax and buckwheat. And interspersed in between all of those is a year of cover cropping. So,
wait, you didn't mention corn or soybeans. What's the matter with you?
No, we don't grow them here. And our precipitation is usually a plus or minus 11.
Okay.
12
pretty
inches.
Dry.
So it's pretty dry. No.
Do you have irrigation?
No irrigation. It's all dryland farming. So it's all about taking care of your soil and paying attention to your crop rotation. And our farm is laid out differently than a lot of other farms around us. We're not doing big blocks of monoculture. We're doing 240-foot wide crop strips with 20 to 30 feet of perennial buffers between every one of those crop strips. And those we've been seeding to native pollinator habitat. So if you look at our
How
farm
did you
from the
come up with
sky,
that
it's like a
system?
giant garden.
It sounds beautiful. How did you come up with that system, and how is that profitable
well,
to
that
put
was-
so much
that-
out of production?
Well, that was all Doug. So about 26% of our acres is in non-crop conservation. So that includes our pollinator strips. We have extensive field buffers. Doug did a lot of inspecting of other organic farms, and just really diversity is something that really hit home for him, and that's been key. And so, across the landscape, then we can manage that diversity both like spatially and temporally then at a larger scale across the landscape. The buffers, we knew we were farming in a place that could be prone to wind erosion and highly variable conditions. And so the original buffers between each of the crop strips were for soil erosion protection, because we have tillage.
You just
which
catch
is
your own soil if it blows, huh?
Yeah, it's terrifying when that happens. And because tillage is part of our system. And then gradually over time, we've realized that those field buffers really have this multiple stacking of benefits. So it's not just about soil erosion. It's like, oh, wow, that's a way to add more diversity into your farm with perennial habitat for pollinator species. It provides snow catch in the winter. So we can see in our combine the yields right on the west side of every one of those strips because it's caught snow. Well, you wouldn't think.
So there's more moisture in the soil.
Yeah, there's more moisture in the soil. So anyway, and it's a great way to access all of our fields and see them, and as we do soil testing, etc.
Could you explain a little bit more about what follows what? And you talk about tillage and needing to till, and I know there's so much confusion around the sustainability of tillage. Could you maybe just talk about your system and how you feel it's sustainable? Because obviously that's important to you through the background that you all have in organic.
Yeah. I can certainly do that. This is really a good platform for Doug to do that. So
great, I'll ask him the same question.
Ask him the same question.
I will.
Yeah, because he's, I'm the engineer and he's the agronomist. So he's going to talk more about the crop rotation because he's really the brains behind that.
Okay.
And it gets tweaked every year depending on what happens. So generally, there's like a light feeding grain, and there's heavy feeding grains, and then there's cover cropping, which can be a single crop of chickling vetch, or it could be a multi-species cover crop, depending on what that strip needs and the soils and etc. And then after that, and I'm not going to have these in the right order, Lindley, so, but lentils, legumes, so that's peas or lentils usually for harvest, although sometimes that can be another crop that's for non-harvest. And then the broadleaves tend to be oil seeds or buckwheat. And then there's also another thing we've been adding around peas and oats. So oats are a lighter feeding grain and they take less from the soil. So, and then the other thing that we've added over the last 2 years is we have a young gentleman working with us who's started a grazing enterprise. So we're actually bringing other people's cows to the farm. Paul's managing them and they're eating our cover crops. So instead of us terminating those with, say, a blade plow or a tillage pass, we've been experimenting with the cows doing it.
Would you talk a little bit about why so much of grain farming is corn and soy and how you've been able to make it work financially to do all these other crops?
I don't know. Corn and soy, it's more of a Midwest thing. Like in Montana, it's basically wheat. We're in a place where it's wheat or not wheat.
Okay, thank you. Just because you said it's drier, huh?
It's drier, and traditionally it's been wheat and then fallow. And what's been happening is people have been moving away from black fallow, which is a tillage pass. So in our ecosystem, the tradition is to seed a crop one year and then the next year seed nothing. So instead of a black fallow tillage pass, which had been traditionally done, now they're just leaving the residue from the previous grain crop and spraying. So it's basically a chemical fallow instead of a other kind of fallow. So that's...
Is this so that they can no-till, so they're herbiciding it down and then they drill in the next crop?
Yeah. So it's basically, they're basically substituting herbicides.
For tillage.
For tillage. And on our farm, we have, I think, 6 different tillage tools. So it's not like it's the same tillage tool for the same thing. You have to really think about, when do you use tillage? What's your reason for using tillage? Which tool do you use given the conditions that you have? I mean, a disc is really different than a blade plow. Like a blade plow is something, it's an undercutter, giant V blades that just slice off, terminate our cover crops, because it's about moisture management in our ecosystem. So we always want to terminate those cover crops before they go to flower. So they've added the nitrogen and the benefits to the soil. And then the beauty of this year is we terminated them and everything just laid down on top of the soil, left all the biomass there and the soil covered. So it's really more of an art of really understanding what tool you use when and for what purpose. Nature has disturbance in it. So, think about what's the reason for the disturbance. Well, you got to feed something back to the soil. And the way to do that is to incorporate the residue.
See, I haven't heard about the blade that you're talking about. I've just heard about the roller crimper. So could you talk a little? So for termination, that's how you do it. It's the kind of undercut with the blade.
We use an undercutter, or we use a speed tiller, which is not very deep, less than 2 inches. Terminates the crop, mixes it in with that top layer of soil. So there's some protection, but then also so the microbes can eat away and it can go back into the soil. The roller crimper, again, this is part of the challenge, is there's not a one size fits all. You have to think about your ecosystem. And for us, you have to have something that has enough moisture in it to actually crimp. And we're in an ecosystem where there's not a lot of moisture. So you can crimp all day. You can try and crimp all day and things will just spring back up.
Oh, interesting. So I've heard another challenge is once you have all that organic matter on the top of the soil, it can lead to really cool soils. Is that something that you have to worry about, or is what you're planting not bothered by that?
That has not been an issue for us, the cooler soil issue. And in fact, actually, it's great because you can terminate, like we did that with our chickling vetch this year and the blade plow, and it lays there on top. And when we had 100-degree temperatures in July, that's actually a really positive thing for us.
Yeah, you're holding on to water.
Yeah, you're holding on to water. You're keeping cooler your soil's cooler, so your microbes are happier.
Have you been following any of the policies that are giving a lot of these climate carbon credits to no-till with herbicides?
Oh.
And how should organic farmers really be standing up? I imagine you've been maintaining soil organic matter for decades. And so, how do you show kind of that maintenance over the, farmers that have been degrading their soils that are now going to increase and get these carbon credits? What are any concerns you have there?
That's a trick. So I can't say I've done all of the climate policy stuff because there's so much happening right now to follow it. But I think it's a good thing to be having the conversation. I think, for a farm like ours, I've been trying for years to say, where can we get payments for ecosystem services? Because in a year like this, where we had terrible drought, we had the best looking crops we've ever had early June. Doug was doing crop scouting and we were giving things 8s on a scale of 1 to 10, which we've never done. And by the end of June, early July, we were giving things 3. We literally watched the lentils just desiccate away because it became 90 degrees plus, no moisture, 50-mile-an-hour winds. It was miserable. So in a year like this, those ecosystem services payments, we still planted all the cover crop. We still did the things to take care of our soil. And the only way we have income is if we have a crop to sell. So the ecosystem service payments are a way to, I think, help make up that difference, make that recognition of farms that are actually doing the right thing. However, the way that I'm seeing them be implemented is not necessarily going to be conducive for organic farmers. we worked with one of the carbon markets early on and were told that we're too complex to model. So they,
Great.
So they dropped us, right? So, and that thing is, we've been doing this. There's this issue of additionality, right? You have to adopt a new practice or a new thing. And this has been part of our farming system since 2009. So there's no credit for the work that we've already done in investment of the long haul. So
and continue to do.
And continue to do. Yeah, I mean, this year is the prime example. We took on another 3,000 acres that we're taking off of herbicides. And feeding them some diversity, giving those microbes some diversity.
Let's talk a little bit about what your concerns are with herbicides, because this is becoming such a big thing now, no-till with herbicides. What are kind of those farmers missing out on when they use them? What's happening to their soils? Where are your concerns?
Great questions, Lindley. And I don't know that I'm going to be the best person to talk about that, because I don't even pay attention to the herbicides. So, that's just not anything that we use in our system. We're just not going to use a method of killing. That's just not part of us. I will tell you, though, that, for us, take, for example, the acreage we just took on this year, new landowner, great lease, we're transitioning. The farm previously had been just wheat, no wheat, no wheat. Okay. So we wanted to do peas. We had a contract for non-GMO peas because that transition period's really tough, right? You're not getting organic prices and you're trying to move your soil to a healthier state. So your production might be different. And then we found out what herbicide had been sprayed. And it's something that sticks around in the soil for 36 months and decimates anything broadleafs. So there was absolutely no way that we could plant the peas then. So we had
Which herbicide was it?
Oh, I'm trying to remember the name. They all have.
Was it aminopyralids?
I don't know. It was some other. I don't remember all the names.
I know there's newer chemistries that are actually fat soluble that kind of mimic hormones. So really small doses are effective. So they got the highest, the best ratings from the EPA. But the reality is that those small doses mean their effect. First of all, there's fat soluble, so they're not going to wash away, and their effect lasts for years.
Right.
And in dry climates, it's even worse.
Because you don't have the moisture movement. Yeah.
Right. The life in the soil can't really break it down if it's so dry. So we've had, we farm in a plot that it's been 10 years since it's sprayed, and it was spot sprayed, but we still see the places where those aminopyralids were sprayed.
Yeah.
I think Milestone is the common name for
Milestone.
What's used a lot, and that's the aminopyralid chemistry. But there's others out there.
Yeah,
too.
I don't know. This might have been Ally, the names are all just so fascinating to me. It's like we're at war, right? It's like, well, I guess in some ways we are, which is so sad. But that really impacted our crop plan this year because we thought, wow, we're gonna have a pea contract. We can start some diversity with some legumes in the soil. And it's a non-GMO contract because it's not organic yet.
Right.
Great. And then we had to totally pivot. So,
So it was the legumes that reacted the most. It must be that same chemistry. Is that what you're saying?
It must be,
I know legumes are very sensitive to them.
Legumes, broadleaves, we couldn't pivot and do flax or anything else like that because it was 36 months that it can hang out in the soil.
We actually had, they say 36 months, and it turns out to be a decade.
It can be more.
It's worse.
I mean, it can be more.
Right, depending on the rain and
right.
If you get some tillage in there, that'll probably speed it up. But especially if you have moisture. But we brought in Dow is the one that produced the particular one that we're struggling with, and we brought in a representative, and she said, it's on you to test your soils and your compost, and if you get this bioassay, so these plants don't react and these plants do, and peas was one of the ones that react, all the legumes do, and the cucurbits don't, then you know that you've got herbicide carryover, and it's up to you to plant accordingly. And it's like, well, I'm a tomato farmer, right?
Right.
So I need to get tomatoes in the ground, and they're sensitive. And so how is this on me? I wanted to be like, you shouldn't be producing a product that lasts for decades in the soil in an arid climate. That was the response I got.
Oh, that's too bad. I know. What do we do? There's, in Montana alone, there's 18 million acres of cropland. and less than 1% of that is certified organic. So we've got a long way to go if we actually want to scale up and have more acres under what Doug and I believe is a more sane production system that doesn't use those off-farm inputs and the chemicals that just stick around for a very long time. So
let's talk about that. There's only 1% in Montana, and that's kind of the trend across the country.
Generally, yeah, I haven't checked recently, but it was about 1%, yeah.
So I've heard you say it's just damn hard work, and that's why there's not more organic acres. But what are all the things that are contributing to kind of the reasons why there isn't more?
Oh, well, the other thing Doug and I are doing is we have an apprentice program. So we've been bringing in young individuals to be part of our operation with the idea that if we are mutually agreeable, we can then help them incubate an enterprise or incubate into managing one of our farm units and do that collectively together. So
you'd say it's skills. That's
I'll
a big
say
one.
that to say is I think it's skills. I think it's a mindset. Like we think it's going to be easier to bring people with an organic mindset or bent to agriculture than trying to change what exists out there now. It's really about what's between your two ears. That's the biggest change, the biggest transition that you have to make. And frankly, there's less than 1 or 2% of us in the United States trying to make a living from production agriculture. So if we're going to have farms like ours that are going to be more complex and more diverse, that takes more people power. So we have to find ways to bring more people into this if we're going to do it. I think that's the biggest barrier. I don't know. Our neighbors, I'm sure, would say, wow, you guys work really hard, because it's easy to go harvest and do one thing. It's a lot harder to do 21 things, So I think that's the biggest barrier is the mindset.
I was talking with Amanda Starbuck at Food and Water Watch, and she was talking about the reason why she does her work is because her mom left farming from North Dakota because it seemed like an awful way of life. And so is it possible that what you're doing when you're using that thing between your two ears, is a little bit more fun and interesting and a lot of people might want to do it actually instead of, the chemical farming just where you're sitting on a tractor all day?
Yeah. I mean, we think so, but let's not gloss over. It's not all roses and glory and unicorns and rainbows, right? Like there is a lot of talk about regenerative agriculture. There's supposedly a lot of money going into regenerative agriculture. I think the biggest thing we got to get out of the mindset on is it's not going to be one silver bullet. It's not going to be one magic fund. It's every single farm like ours needs some stability and some stable income. Because in a year like this, what is our backdrop? What's our backdrop? Our backdrop is crop insurance, which is not that fabulous for a farm like ours. It's super diverse. Or Doug and I go get another disaster loan that we personally hold from USDA. So I think the gap between this discussion and talk about what kind of agriculture we all want to see in the morning and then what it takes to actually do it on the ground. Like we need more people doing it, and we need every single farm organism that's doing it now to be in a place that's stable to keep doing that soil building, because soil building doesn't happen on quarterly profit reporting cycles. And the other system, it's not that it's just easier. It's not that those people are not smart doing it. It's that you're stuck in a system that you can't even fathom how you're going to get out of it. Right? So maybe I stop using some herbicides. That might save me some money. But then I got this weed problem I don't know how to handle. And then, oh man, that messes up my crop insurance, which is my backstop. I mean, crop insurance today, you can insure 80% of your revenue. What business can't make it insuring 80% of your revenue? I mean, the most that we can insure, because we're on whole farm and we're trying to do diversity, is maybe 60%. So there needs to be some other support mechanism to make up that gap in years like this. So, frankly, climate change It's terrifying. It's terrifying to think about the variability. We've seen such variability, and we know we're farming in a challenging place. We know that it's variable to start with, but it is more variable than it has ever been. And you can't count on anything. And it's hard. Like, it's mentally hard to watch this lentil crop that's amazing just go to nothing. Like, I don't know. And then you've done all the work.
Yeah, and you don't have that irrigation water to rely on like everybody does.
Right. Well, is
there irrigation in your area, or is everybody dry farming?
No, we're dry farming. It's all dry. And I think we got to think about irrigation too, right? Like, it's not just about the carbon cycle on the planet. It's about the water cycle on the planet. And that is going to be as confused and variable as that's the system that's not going to be functioning for us.
Yeah, there's so much there in what you just said, so I don't even know where to go.
Yeah, I know. Sorry,
but
I go. No,
it's so good.
Heavy duty stuff.
Maybe let's talk first about some of these policies. You mentioned whole farm insurance and why you need to do that over a farm that's just growing wheat can get 80% of their crop, and why you can't do that. Why can't you get 80%? Because you have so many different crops. Why are you forced into whole farm?
Well, this is what's confusing, is we can actually insure just the wheat that way, which we're doing, but the rest of the farm we're not. I mean, how do you, and part of that is because it's a system. We're trying to insure a system of production, not an individual crop. So we need to be incentivizing the systems, the holistic systems, with an integrated approach. And that's the theory behind whole farm. The implementation has been less than satisfactory for us because the agents don't know how to use it, RMA doesn't know how to use it, the adjusters don't know how to use it. It's super confusing when you're used to having a map that says, here, go look at this field of wheat. And now you get a map that has 20 different things in the same size acreage as that field of wheat. And you have to parse out what's flax and what's lentils and what's cover crop and when did you seed it. And it's a huge additional burden on us for all the reporting.
Okay, so the insurance is different, and then the subsidies are different too, because I've heard, and now I don't know what's going on with wheat, but that a lot of corn and soy in the Midwest, they'll get a check that's below the cost of production when they sell their grain. But then they get a second check from the government that just subsidizes what they've done. So it incentivizes them to keep, growing something when it's below the cost of production.
I can't speak to all of those subsidies. We're going to...
Do you get those checks?
If we get some checks, we're in the system, right? We're going to take advantage of the system that we're in to help us build a new system.
Or which crops have them?
It was for wheat, yeah.
Okay.
At least the things I remember most from last year was all the COVID funding, and it was for wheat production. It was kind of crazy, the funds that came, but...
So I have to ask, if wheat is what the government is saying, they want to subsidize, how are you making it work to grow all these other things?
Well, we're trying to do some really creative things with our buyers. So, for us, it's not about always hitting the high sales, right? It's about what is that stable income that we need per acre to know so we can be in business over the long run. And how do we make that happen? So, for example, we've been trying to negotiate contracts that the seed cost is paid for up front. So maybe we take a lower price on the actual production, but then we're not also having to cash flow this giant amount of seed expense at the beginning of the year.
Right.
This is how do we share risk and reward with the rest of the supply chain? That really, I think, is what's going to shift more people to a better production system, is if we can make it work better at the producer level. We're doing things like longer term contracts. We're doing things like, okay, if you don't take delivery, because it's a cash flow thing, right? So if you don't take delivery of your crop, then we're going to charge you a storage fee, or you're going to pay for 80% of what our estimated amount is up front. So we have some cash flow to keep moving forward. it's things like that. And it's tough when we're trying to scale, and how do you build a relationship with your buyers? Because what's happened is we have a food system that's built on transactions, not on relationships. And those are end up with two very different approaches. You actually care about the person on the other end of the relationship. Whereas if it's a transaction, you don't have to care so much.
I've always really struggled to figure out how grain production can take advantage of those direct relationships, because it is a commodity and your product ends up getting mixed in. You can't sell it directly, right? And so it makes it so difficult because you're growing on this acreage that's probably too large for direct. But many of these kind of mid-scale farms are too small for wholesale too. And so they kind of just get squeezed out. So what are your thoughts in terms of making it work?
Well, we're experimenting. So it's a challenge, right? We want to sell things in semi-loads. And if we want vast more acres off the chemicals, I mean, we've got to imagine, what does that system look like, right? We're going to sell things in semi-loads. So we have that, and we also recently got a value-added producer grant. So we're going to try and figure out how we can clean and bag and sell grains direct in 50-pound bags, more direct to millers, distillers, breweries.
And so you can bring that relationship back.
So we can bring that relationship back. Now, that's definitely not going to be our way to sell our entire amount of our production, but some that might also provide another stable income stream. The challenge inherent in all of that, though, is that it's not enough to just farm, right? It's not enough to just actually know what to do with your soils and set up the crop rotations and make sure you have all the storage space for your harvest. Like, now we have to go add an entire other enterprise. That means we have to have more people and more infrastructure and equipment to do the cleaning and the bagging and the sales. And so that's, we're excited about that project, because we've also had several other companies call us and say, can you send me 2,000 pounds of lentils? At a significantly increased price than what we're selling under our other contract. We're like, wow, we'd love to do that, but we have to get the cleaning piece set up. So yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword. We need to do it. We feel like we've got to do it, but we also are like, man, that's an entire other enterprise that now we're going to have to manage.
Right. That sounds like when I told kind of a distant relative that I wanted to go into organic farming when I was young. And he was just like, why would you ever want to make things so difficult for yourself and swim upstream? Why not just do what everybody else does and just make it easier for yourself? So talk about some of the reasons why you're making your life so difficult. The guiding principles behind, you believe in what you do clearly. So, just talk about why you're willing to maybe make a little less because it's something that you believe is going to save us in the future.
Well, it can't all be about money, right? But, I'm still actually employed off the farm 3 days a week. So that's how Doug and I have our health insurance and some stability under us to pay for the mortgage on the house. I don't know. I've always been an agent of change, and sustainability is core to who I am. And I think it's more fun to farm this way. It's definitely more complicated, but and I think actually growing food, not a commodity, is also something that drives us. And I just feel like we have a responsibility to steward the land that we've been lucky enough to be given the gift to manage. I mean, that's a responsibility. And if we don't continue to believe Mother Nature's a partner in this with us and show up in a way that exemplifies that, man, I'm worried. I don't know, Lindsley, I don't want you to cut all this stuff into the video, but why do we do it? I don't know. That's an interesting question, especially after a year like this year where we had, right? We have neighbors, we have organic neighbors to the east of us that didn't even take their combine to the field this year. It was the drought and the grasshoppers and the smoky sky. And we're like, wow, there is a lot of other things we could do that are easier. but then I have lentils behind me and rye, and I can bake bread and share that with other people. I don't know. That's not a very good answer to your question.
Would you expand? You said, I don't want to grow commodity. I want to grow food for people. Would you explain what you meant there?
Well, okay, so this rye behind us, it goes to a processor here in Montana, and it goes into bags that at least people care about the organic label. I don't know. It's not like some faceless thing, right? And this is food. This is things that people actually eat. Whereas like in the corn and soybean world, what is that going to? Not actually food, like corn syrup, maltodextrin, high fructose corn syrup. That's not food, right? I don't know. Good.
Animals in confinement.
Yeah, right. Well, and I guess too, it's not just about the food. It's not like, okay, why do I farm? Well, Doug likes to drive. I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear what Doug says. I'm sure he likes to drive big equipment, but there's also like this stewardship component, right? Like, why do I farm? Because it is really hard. I farm because it's like a responsibility. It's like I want to do more with our conservation. I want to be a agent of change, and I feel like if I want sustainability on the planet, this is a way that I can physically manifest that and show that to others and help others learn and maybe model some new ways. Like, we don't have it figured out. The land that we're farming way north on the border, we're on the very far western edge of prairie pothole migratory bird habitat. And I'm so excited about some of this transition ground that we just took in, because now we're going to have some more contiguous management of organic. And I'm really excited to find other partners in conservation to say, what does that look like? How do we do agriculture integrated with nature? It's not like we're just setting it aside and we're going to do agriculture over here and nature over here. Like, she's part of it.
Yeah, you talked about some of these ecosystem services, and there was a Nature article that came out about a year ago, I remember, that was saying that organic, because it's less productive per acre, it meant that, what they were saying, and they want to get more acreage rewilded, that organic was a problem because it required more acreage to get the same yields. And this was in Nature.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, what are these scientists missing?
Well, they're not looking at it from a holistic system, right? Okay, so maybe our yields are a little less, but maybe they're more nutrient dense. So maybe we need to eat a little less. And maybe it's not about yields. Maybe it's about food waste and shipping and distribution. I think we can all have a really wonderful life on this planet and have enough. I think we have to think about not scarcity and not abundance, but sufficiency. What is enough for all of us to thrive? And I think the other thing about organic is you're totally assuming, maybe within that article, I remember reading a little bit of it, that we're going to farm in the same way that we're farming with this other chemical-based production system. And that's not how our farm is. Diversity is interspersed. And I don't know, I'd be really interested in understanding what they mean by wild. Like, what is wild? There's no place on this planet that has not already been touched by human impact. And it's not like nature's out here and we're here. We're together in this journey. So
perhaps those buffer strips that you have on your farm are because, you're looking at invasives or other things, that is better rewilding because you're managing it. Would you say that? What are some of the things that you're looking at in those buffer strips?
Well, there's habitat there that wasn't before. I know that we have, to me, and this is all qualitative, so, it'd be awesome to do some more quantitative science on this, but I'm pretty sure we have many more pollinators than we are other places. There's bird habitat in there. What's happening with the soil microbes, right? Like, I don't think we understand at all what goes on underground. And are those perennial buffers connected in some way? Because they're little microcosms. This little snowcatch piece in itself is like a little microcosm of more moisture, with more broadleaves, with more, prairie flowers. So what happens there? Qualitatively also, in fields that we took over to transition to organic that had been monoculture, big blocks of wheat, versus our fields, the wildlife incidents where there's wildlife interactions with our equipment, it's far less on our fields than it is on these big blocks, in seeding operations. Because the birds actually have a place to nest. There's a place to run to. And again, I don't have firm scientific data on that. I just know my experience of being out and seeing the differences. And you can feel the differences in the equipment too, with the soils. Like soils that have been fed a diverse diet and cared for, it feels different in the tractor than soils that have just been sprayed. Like, you can tell that.
Yeah, I know that organic was supposed to be this kind of savior for these small diversified farms, and hope that they would really be able to expand because they would have markets, and that hasn't been the case. We've kind of been stagnant. Do we need different policies? What are some of the reasons that you think that we're stuck here and organic hasn't been able to come through as the savior for family scale farming because of all the consolidation that was happening in conventional farming? Is that happening in organic as well?
We're concerned that the supply chain is just becoming commodified. I mean, we're asking for a fundamentally different production system at the farm level under organic. But then what are we doing? We're replicating the way the supply distribution system works. And we're replicating those contracting mechanisms. We're replicating the transactions. And we can't have companies saying, oh, I care about organic, and here, farmer, make sure you do the difference on the ground, but I'm not going to do anything in terms of changing the economics or the way we interact on the supply chain. Yeah, we got to change the whole system, and that's a really hard thing to think about. And so I think if we could change that system that brings resources in and out and makes farms more viable, because farms do so many good things for us as a society, right? It's not just about growing food. It's about taking care of a habitat. It's about clean water. It's about clean air. It's about providing jobs. It's about buying things in your small community because you're now an economic entity. And like for Doug and I, we've imported people from other places to live in this rural place now, right? So there's this nice circularity about it. And we have to figure out how we keep that. Like, a farm, in a way, is a beating heart to me of a community. And we need to keep those hearts alive. That's all kind of philosophical, but I think the vision's great, but we can't just ask the farm to change a production system. We have to change the system that's of support that's around that.
And I think the consumers and the eaters, they want to support you. I think they're really confused in the marketplace. There's a lot of greenwashing going on. How can eaters find farms like yours and support them?
Yeah, and that's tricky because we're not able to sell direct to eaters. So what we have to do is find partners in our supply chain that are willing to keep our identity preserved products and help tell the story. I know a little bit of me wants to go find an agent that just says, okay, you can buy the rye off Vilicus, but if you want the farm story, that's this extra add-on amount of money that you pay no matter what. Or, like how much more per box if you want to keep the farm story intact.
Well, and what's been so confusing too is that there is that farm story, that beautiful farm, that small farm that is on the picture of the cover of the product. And then what percentage of that product is that farm?
Right.
That gets lost, right?
It's
And it
totally
becomes
lost.
a tokenism.
Yeah, right. So I think we need to figure out, what's a new mechanism to really keep that. I mean, organic is I think it's the only system we have where there's actually identity preservation's possible. Like everything we sell off this farm has a lot number. Every processor who does processing has a lot number associated with it. We can do this. We have technology and ability. We just need to figure out what does that look like. Because the company selling it at the end, they don't own the story. The story of that farm is not theirs.
Yeah. Yeah, figuring out how to get that transparency behind what the eaters are actually purchasing, I think, is the key to all of this, because I do believe they will. If they feel they know the truth behind the product, I think they will support us, and they'll pay more for it because they'll know it's a better product and they believe in the values behind it. And so that's where we have to figure out how to maintain that transparency. Right. You probably haven't been affected as much by, I know the New Yorker just covered the constant fraud, and that was domestic fraud on a large scale. And then there's also been, the Washington Post covered the imported fraud, mostly corn and soy, and the same thing for Constant. So it might not be in your markets, but what effect do you think that has had on the growth of organic in this country, like, on prices and things like that?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I'm probably not the best person to answer some of those questions, Lindley. I think it's unfortunate because it really brings the question of the organic label. What is it? What does it mean when I buy this? How do people? I think you're right. Your piece about consumers being confused, that's very true. I'm sure they're confused.
Yeah, I think we have to balance those kind of harsh stories with the stories of the organic movement. How many farmers are out here doing the right thing and why, so that the consumers don't just say, well, forget it all, I'm going to go back to chemical because I can't trust this. We have to be really loud about who we are. There's so many farms across the country.
I think it's really important the farmers themselves need to stand up and, not just be loud about who we are, but be smart about it too. So, with all due respect, I just continue to scratch my head about how many ag service providers exist in the world. Well, why is that? Because it's easier to go get a job with an ag service provider where you're going to get paid every 2 weeks and have health insurance than it is to actually farm. Like, what's up with that system? That is not right. Like, it is not that we haven't had some good technical service providers, but I'm an engineer by training. So I took 4 years of school, and then I had to take, a big test, and then I had to work under another engineer for 2 years and take another big test before I could be, certified with my license to go design things that could fall down and kill people. And in agriculture, we're not asking for that same amount of rigor. We're, in the other system, you can go to the local co-op and they're going to do your soil test and they're going to pay. They're going to do your soil test and then they're going to tell you what things to put down. I mean, that's conflict of interest. Like, I would never have the provider that's providing concrete for this foundation also do their own testing, right? So I don't know, that all to say, I feel like it's, there's not enough of us farming, and it is such hard work and it's so intense. It's really hard to get your head up above to be able to advocate for better policies or participate, and we've created this system that's reliant on service providers versus actually maybe if we paid the farms themselves to do the good hard work and be smart about it and learn about it, we might have some different outcomes.
Yeah, it sounds like one of the solutions that you mentioned was just having shorter supply chains so that, people can actually, purchase what they believe in and know what they're purchasing.
Right.
What are some things that give you hope in terms of creating those shorter supply chains? Are there cooperatives and regionality in all this?
Oh, well, one thing that just happened here in our little neck of the woods is we've been working with Farmers Union, and Paul, our young agrarian who's incubating this grazing enterprise, worked with Farmers Union and a group of other people, and now we have a meat processing cooperative that just started this year. So, and there's going to be organic slots in that. And so, the processing piece, that's one piece of the puzzle. So I think if we can find ways to work together on very specific implementable things, we can start building this. Building the parts and pieces that we need to a different system and explore that and bring other people in. I think it's really easy sometimes to get overwhelmed by all the change that needs to happen. And I think every one of us sits, where are we? Do what you can with what you have where you're at is, I think, the most important lesson I've learned. That's what gives me hope, is that there's opportunities now, I think, especially with the pandemic and people's change towards their food system, that we haven't had that in the past.
Yeah. Why did you sign up for the Real Organic Project?
Oh, Doug and I signed up for the Real Organic Project because we believe things need to be grown in soil. And Real Organic Project was working on that.
Yeah, among many other things.
Among many other things, but that was
sort of fighting that corporate takeover in the organic system.
That was the impetus.
And a huge discussion, came out of it from all the farmers that lost that battle about, trying to keep organic in the soil. And so there was a big proposal that a bunch of farmers showed up to the National Organic Standards Board meetings, which never happens, right? But soil is something that gets them there. And when they lost that, the big question was, well, should we just start over? Yeah. And some of the farmers were like, rah, rah, yeah, we can do it better. And then, a lot of the other farmers were saying, well, what's going to keep us from ending up right back where we are now in 20 years? Why shouldn't we just start over, in your opinion? Why is organic worth fighting for?
Oh, I think because we've got a rule, we've got a standard. Like, it's on us. Let's work together to make it better. Like continuous improvement, right? That's what Mother Nature does. She evolves. Every year is a little different. You get better at things. Like, we should do the same thing with our policies. And we're learning a lot more about what good organic systems are, the soils, etc., how we do it. Like, let's make sure that piece of continuous improvement is embedded in our rules and our production systems.
Yeah, and it is such a good rule too. It's just the enforcement that needs a little bit more backing, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, I appreciate so much you taking the time, Anna, to talk to me. And I hope that in spite of all the troubles, first of all, you're able to come back and farm. That's the goal, right? Every year,
well,
even if it was hard, you can come back and do it.
We totally pivoted this year, which is, we've been bailing. We've been bailing and bailing and bailing. So we had like acres of failed wheat, grain, durum crops, oats, and we've baled them. And while we don't want to be in a system where we're exporting biomass, in a year like this where there's no hay, we've been able to sell hay. So I think, that speaks, the diversity also allows us to have some resiliency in a way that other farms may not. So yeah, thanks.
I love that. So I remember hearing you say that biodiversity can free the Midwest from this chemical treadmill. That's one example that you just came up with. Is it the organic matter in your soil and all these conservation strips that kept enough water for you to actually bail something off of your land here where other people haven't been able to do that?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think you can't also draw straight lines on some of these things, right? But if you have a system that you're working to keep whole and intact and it's integrated, then there's going to be some more resiliency in ways that we might not otherwise have.
Talk a little bit about in spite of all the hard work, that it's a way of life that I'm assuming that you've chosen to stick it out.
Oh, yeah.
Why? What is so great about it?
There are days when you're like, what am I doing? Well, I guess what's great too is, the end of every week we have a crew dinner. And, so at one point in time, I think we had 20 people this summer, because between interns and apprentices and some other farm visitors. And and we have a local chef. She's also, her family farms and ranches organically. And so Sarah comes up and cooks for us. And I always make her stop. Everybody has to stand around, and Sarah tells the story of the food, like, what are we having? A lot of times it's things, off of our farm or from other organic producers. And so we get a story, and then we always go around, and we also have to say, what our win for the week was. And I think it's really important that we take time to be grateful for all the abundance that we do have. And so what gives me hope, or why do I do it, is like crew dinners are pretty fun here, because we all take a time to reflect, and things that I would not think of as wins. It's amazing how often that sense of community comes up with our crew when we do that.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I didn't even ask, how many people are you working with?
So let's see, we have 4 full-time employees, and then we traditionally have 2 8-month apprentices, and then it depends on the year, it can be like 3 interns, plus or minus, that are here for a shorter time frame. But yeah, we would be happy to talk to anybody if they're interested in apprenticing. I have this value-added rye project going on, so we need someone that wants to market rye and figure out all the cleaning around that. There's some awesome
I know
stuff.
what label can help you market your rye.
Yeah, definitely.
Because that's going to be direct, right?
Because that can be direct, right? So I need someone, anybody wants to come work with us, let us know. We're building 2 tiny houses so we can have some more staff housing, because, we're really up here in the middle of nowhere. So housing and infrastructure are kind of a need thing. What else gives me hope? We have a small nonprofit, Vilicus Training Institute, that's been stood up to help figure out how we can change systems on the Northern Great Plains to have more agrarians thrive and expand organic agriculture. And so Vilicus Training Institute was one of the founding members of the Montana Agrarian Commons. So we're trying to work on an Agrarian Commons project, which that gives me hope too, because that's a Montana Agrarian Commons, but it's connected to the larger Agrarian Commons, and there's some amazing projects going on across the entire U.S. around that.
That means that if you're a beginning farmer and you don't have land, you have a spot to farm and learn.
Yes.
That's what these commons are.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I always saw it as such a short-term thing, because owning land, because you're going to give so much care to it, was so much a part of why I wanted to be the farmer.
Right.
In my life. So how would all that work? And is there a pathway to success out of that program?
Oh, yeah.
Or is it just like there's too many obstacles, like the cost of land, all these things, it's going to be 1 in 20 make it or something?
Well, for us, I think a lot of people come and they realize, like, man, this is not what I thought it was, and I don't know if I can commit myself that for our apprentice program. But I think it's just going to take a few unique individuals that want to make that commitment. And Doug and I are committed to saying, we have access to land, we have equipment, we want to work with people. So we're, as much as we all love the family farm concept, I think we have to think differently about what that business model is. Like, we're talking, is there an umbrella where we can host enterprises underneath of that? So like collectively we can all do the accounting and the payroll and we can spend the time doing the enterprise. If you're a 20-something individual and you want to farm, but where do you have the resources to do that? You don't. We've learned too, the level of risk, what they're interested in is much different than Doug and I. Many of them don't necessarily want that independence, is not as a big a thing. It's more about being able to work with people on a common goal. So we're really rethinking our whole business structure that can have some sort of employee ownership, collaborative, cooperative, something that gives space for new entrants. That's our succession plan anyway.
Well, especially if you say, because very few of us got into this because we want to do payroll or the books, right? So if you're saying we're taking all that off the table and we can do this more communally,
we need to figure out how to do it together. Yeah, exactly, right? So we can do it together. Because like Doug and I, people are not going to do what Doug and I did, which is amass whatever resources you can, and then when you become 40, go buy farmland and start. Like, people thought we were nuts. Like, the banking system thought we were nuts. And I don't think you have to own all your land. I think that's also a different model. Like, we only own outright 328 acres out of the 12,600 we're farming. And we've found some really amazing landowners with long-term leases who want good stewards. And
the care for that acreage that you don't own, it feels the same to you.
It feels the same. It feels the same to us because we have mutually beneficial relationships with our landowners. So when you talk about risk sharing, right? Like, there's the farm, and then what's the land? The leasing is kind of our next piece, and then it's our crop contracting. How do we share risk better that way? Like, someday we won't pay anybody unless there's a crop. If we don't get paid, then nobody else should get paid. But we're still in a system where we pay for everything, no matter what happens, and we have to change that if we really care about climate.
You're talking about the inputs that go into the system in the first place. If you don't get the crop, you've already put all this in.
Right. Whereas like a lot of our landowners, we have share leases, so their amount that they get is based on what the production was.
I see. Well, it's so interesting talking to you, and I don't want to get more of your time, but like there's so much here, and I can't wait to talk to Doug, and I appreciate your time today.
Yeah,
Thank you so
thanks
much.
a lot, Lindley. Well, I appreciate the work that you guys are doing, and just helping to get the word out and create a larger community around organic, because that's what's going to help make a difference.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you'll subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a rating and review. A video version of this interview, as well as the full transcript with links related to our conversation, is found at realorganicproject.org/episode 67. Please join us next time when our favorite guest, Alan Lewis, joins us again from Natural Grocers. To support this podcast and our certified farms, become a recurring donor at realorganicproject.org and get the benefits of being a real friend, including our book club, where you can ask some of our favorite authors your questions. See you next time.